Imagine walking through your neighborhood and hearing the steady hum of machines, not from factories miles away, but right in your own home. Your clothes are washed with the press of a button. Your room is warmed by an invisible force. You swipe a screen and connect instantly with someone on the other side of the world. Now, stop and ask yourself, how did we get here? The answer lies in a time not so long ago, just a couple of centuries back, when none of this was imaginable. There were no engines. No electricity. No mass production. Life was local, laborious, and slow. But then, something changed. A spark was lit. And that spark became a revolution, not of armies, but of machines, ideas, and ways of living. This was the Industrial Revolution, and it would reshape the world forever. But let's not treat it like just a chapter in a history book. Think of it more like a turning point in the human story, one where we traded muscle for machines, tradition for innovation, and simplicity for complexity. It's not just about factories and coal. It's about people, their hopes, their fears, their breakthroughs, and their sacrifices. And it's about us, too, because many of the challenges we face today, climate change, inequality, automation, have roots in what happened during that time. So here's a question worth exploring together. What does it mean for a society to transform itself so deeply that daily life becomes unrecognizable within a single generation? It's easy to look back now and see it all as progress, the railroads, the light bulbs, the booming cities. But for those who lived through it, the Industrial Revolution was full of contradictions. It brought wealth to some and misery to many. It created opportunity and erased traditions. It gave rise to new powers while making others obsolete. Some people saw it as a miracle. Others called it a curse. And that's the paradox we're going to unpack. Why did this moment in history happen when it did? Who were the people behind the machines? What did we gain, and what did we lose? To begin, let's go back to the late 1700s, to a time when most people lived in small villages, worked on farms, and had little interaction with the outside world. Everything was done by hand. If you wanted clothes, someone had to spin the thread and sew the fabric. If you needed light, you lit a candle. Life was hard, but it was familiar. And for generations, it hardly changed. But beneath the surface, forces were stirring. Britain, in particular, had a few ingredients that would turn it into the cradle of industrial change. First, it had coal, lots of it. This black rock would soon power engines, heat furnaces, and drive trains. Second, it had colonies, which provided both raw materials and global markets. Third, it had a relatively stable political system and strong financial institutions, banks, insurance, and investments that supported innovation. But perhaps the most important factor was the spirit of invention. In this period, thinkers, tinkerers, and craftsmen began experimenting like never before. Some did it out of curiosity. Others saw a chance to make money. But their inventions would change the course of history. Take the spinning jenny, for example, a machine that allowed one worker to spin multiple threads at once. Or James Watt's improvements to the steam engine, which made it powerful and efficient enough to drive machines in factories and ships across oceans. Suddenly, human labor wasn't the only way to get things done. Factories began to appear, at first in small towns, then in cities. And with factories came workers. People moved from the countryside into industrial centers, often leaving behind centuries of rural life. Entire cities grew almost overnight. Manchester in England, for instance, was once a market town. By the mid-1800s, it was a booming industrial powerhouse. But this wasn't just about machines replacing hands. It was about changing rhythms of life. For the first time, people began working by the clock. Shifts replaced seasons. The sun no longer dictated your day, the factory bell did. Children, too, were sent to work. Some were as young as 5, working long hours in dangerous conditions. And yet, in the middle of all this, there was excitement. Progress. Pride. A belief that humanity was on the edge of something new, something better. Steamships shrank the oceans. Trains shrank countries. Telegraph wires carried messages across continents in seconds. The world felt faster, more connected, more alive. Still, not everyone shared in the prosperity. The gap between rich and poor widened. While factory owners became wealthy, workers often lived in overcrowded slums, exposed to pollution, disease, and low wages. Strikes and protests became more common. Voices rose asking, who really benefits from all this progress? That's where we'll go next, into the lives of those often left out of the textbooks. Because to truly understand how the Industrial Revolution shaped our modern world, we need to hear not only from the inventors and entrepreneurs, but from the children in the coal mines, the women at the looms, the migrants chasing dreams, and the thinkers who questioned it all. Let's listen to those voices and see what they can teach us today. We often celebrate the big names in history, James Watt, Richard Arkwright, George Stephenson, and they certainly played a role. But what about the millions who lived the revolution, not in invention, but in survival? Let's take a closer look at those hidden forces and forgotten voices, the people whose hands built the machines, whose backs carried the coal, whose hearts kept beating despite the smoke, the noise, and the relentless pace of change. In many factories, it was women and children who formed the backbone of labor. They were cheaper to hire, easier to control, and, in the eyes of the industrialists, more suited to repetitive tasks. In textile mills, girls as young as 10 stood for 12 hours a day, tending to spinning frames and weaving looms. In coal mines, boys dragged carts through dark tunnels so narrow that adults couldn't fit. It's easy to feel shocked by these images. And we should. But it's also important to ask, why did families allow their children to work like this? The answer isn't simple. Many had no choice. As rural jobs disappeared, and as wages in factories remained low, every extra hand meant a better chance of survival. For many working-class families, child labor wasn't cruelty, it was necessity. Still, not everyone accepted this as normal. Social reformers like Charles Dickens used novels to open the public's eyes. Inspectors and activists documented conditions, eventually pushing governments to pass labor laws, banning child labor, shortening workdays, improving safety. But change was slow. And for every reform, there were those who resisted, saying it would hurt profits or disrupt the economy. Let's not forget the voices of migrants either, people who moved across oceans to join the industrial workforce. In the United States, the Industrial Revolution welcomed millions of immigrants from Ireland, Italy, China, and beyond. They built railroads, dug canals, worked in factories. Many lived in tenement housing, where multiple families shared a single room. Their work helped build the modern world, yet their stories are often left untold. And then there were the thinkers, the philosophers, economists, and critics who began asking deeper questions. Is this really progress? They wondered, if it comes at such a human cost? Karl Marx and Friedrich Engels, for example, observed the conditions of industrial workers in Manchester and developed a revolutionary theory, one that would inspire political movements across the world. They argued that capitalism, as practiced in the industrial age, concentrated power and wealth into the hands of a few while leaving the majority exploited. Whether you agree with them or not, their ideas shook the foundations of modern thought. On the other hand, others believed that industry was the path to freedom. That machines would liberate us from hard labor. That technology, once shared and expanded, would lift everyone's standard of living. In many ways, that dream came true, eventually. But for generations, it was uneven, unfair, and full of sacrifice. It's also important to remember how the Industrial Revolution affected different parts of the world in different ways. In places like India and China, the arrival of industrial powers meant disruption of local industries. British cotton goods, for instance, flooded Indian markets, undercutting traditional weavers and throwing entire communities into poverty. The global economy was being born, but not everyone was invited to the table on equal terms. Meanwhile, in Africa, the industrial hunger for resources, rubber, minerals, oil, drove colonial expansion. European powers, now armed with faster ships and more advanced weapons, carved up territories, extracting wealth and labor to feed their own growing industries back home. So, when we talk about the Industrial Revolution, we must ask, whose revolution was it? Was it the story of brilliant inventors and ambitious businessmen? Yes, but also the story of anonymous workers, displaced artisans, and colonized peoples. Was it a triumph of human innovation? Absolutely. But it also carried deep injustice, consequences we are still grappling with today. And here's something to reflect on: when we invent something powerful, do we also have a responsibility to ask who it might harm? Because what the Industrial Revolution shows us, again and again, is that technology alone doesn't decide the future. People do. Choices do. And when choices are made only for profit, someone else always pays the price. Now, let's turn from the factories and philosophies to the people themselves, the societies that were changed, the emotions they felt, the ways they adapted or resisted. Because the human heart doesn't transform as quickly as a machine. And sometimes, the hardest revolution is the one inside us. Imagine walking down the street of a growing industrial city like Manchester in the mid-1800s. The air is thick with coal smoke. The sound of machines hums in the background. The buildings are packed tightly together. Children play in narrow alleys. Some smile. Others cough. This was the new face of society, born from invention, but shaped by pressure, fear, hope, and survival. The Industrial Revolution didn't just change how people worked, it changed how they lived, thought, and felt. In the early days, people were often overwhelmed. Imagine moving from a quiet village where you knew every neighbor to a city with thousands of strangers, unfamiliar accents, new rules, and the constant pace of production. It wasn't just physically exhausting, it was emotionally disorienting. Psychologists today would call it culture shock. Back then, there was no word for it. But you can hear it in the letters people wrote home. I miss the fields, the noise here never stops, I feel like no one sees me. These weren't just industrial changes, they were spiritual ones, too. At the same time, cities became places of possibility. For many, factory work meant a steady income, something rare in the uncertain cycles of farm life. Young people, especially, saw factories as a way to escape traditional roles and seek new dreams. Some joined labor unions. Some started newspapers. Some built entirely new communities based on shared values and mutual support. And yet, many suffered silently. Depression, exhaustion, anxiety, these were common, but unnamed. There were no workplace psychologists, no employee wellness programs. If you collapsed, you were replaced. If you cried, you did it quietly. It's no wonder that religion and spiritual movements played such a big role during this time. Some people turned to faith for comfort, joining revival meetings or forming new religious groups. Others turned to political ideologies that promised fairness, socialism, anarchism, even utopian experiments where people tried to build perfect communities outside the system. Culture shifted, too. Writers like Elizabeth Gaskell and Charles Dickens painted vivid pictures of industrial life, showing both the triumphs and the tragedies. Artists like J.M.W. Turner captured the tension between nature and machine, using smoke and sky to express awe and alarm. Music changed. New songs echoed the rhythm of the railroads, the whistle of steam, the struggles of labor. People across classes responded differently. For the wealthy, the industrial age often meant opportunity. New businesses, faster travel, access to global markets. But even among the rich, there was discomfort. Victorian morality, with its strict codes of behavior and public decency, was, in part, a reaction to the chaos of rapid change. The world felt unstable. Etiquette became a kind of control. Among the working class, a different code emerged: resilience. Families relied on each other. Communities formed support networks. And slowly, over time, they began demanding more than survival. They wanted fairness, dignity, a voice. The labor movement was born not in a single meeting, but in countless acts of courage: a worker refusing unsafe conditions, a woman speaking out for equal pay, a crowd marching through city streets demanding a 10-hour day. It was messy. It was dangerous. But it was unstoppable. Meanwhile, the revolution also influenced how people saw the future. Before, most people expected their children to live lives similar to their own. But now, the idea of progress took hold, the belief that tomorrow could be better, that technology might solve poverty, that society could be improved with enough effort. Of course, not everyone believed it. Some feared that machines would destroy jobs. Others worried that modern life was making people less connected, less moral, less human. These debates, about technology and meaning, growth and ethics, still shape our world today. And that's the beauty and the burden of history. The emotions people felt during the Industrial Revolution weren't so different from what many of us feel now: excitement about change, fear of being left behind, longing for connection, hope for a better life. So let's pause and ask, when our world changes this fast, how do we stay grounded? What anchors us when the pace of life accelerates? Because if history teaches us anything, it's that behind every invention is a human story. And behind every machine is a heart that must learn how to keep beating, not just faster, but wiser. To understand the full story of the Industrial Revolution, we must look beyond steam engines and factory owners. We need to uncover the hidden forces and listen to the forgotten voices that truly powered this transformation. Let's begin with the workers. Their names rarely appear in textbooks. Yet without them, none of the industrial progress would have been possible. Imagine 12-hour shifts in poorly lit factories, breathing in coal dust, operating loud and dangerous machinery, often without breaks. Men, women, and even children toiled day after day, not for innovation's glory, but for survival. Children were especially vulnerable. They were small enough to crawl under machines and fix tangled threads, but this meant they were also the first to suffer injuries. Many never attended school. Instead, their childhoods were spent in cotton mills and coal mines. And still, they contributed more to the revolution than any single inventor. Many of these workers were women. In fact, in some industries like textiles, women made up the majority of the workforce. They earned less than men, sometimes only half, and had fewer legal rights. But they brought home wages that kept families afloat. They organized protests. They created informal education circles to teach each other how to read. Some became the first voices in the fight for gender equality. Their stories show us that the Industrial Revolution was not just an age of machines, but an age of human courage, often quiet, often unseen, but undeniably real. Then there were the enslaved people. While Britain officially ended the slave trade in 1807, and slavery itself in 1833, the profits from centuries of slavery had already fueled much of its industrial rise. Cotton from the American South, picked by enslaved Africans, was processed in English mills. Sugar, tobacco, and other goods enriched European economies. The wealth generated through exploitation left deep scars, both on people and on principles of justice. Colonized countries, too, played a role in this global shift. India, for example, was a major source of raw materials and a market for British goods. But colonial policies often crushed local industries. Indian weavers, once world-renowned for their fine cotton, found themselves outcompeted by cheap factory-made textiles from Britain. It wasn't just economics, it was cultural erasure. These stories remind us that industrial power came at a cost. While some nations surged forward, others were held back, not by a lack of creativity or intelligence, but by systems of control. And those systems still echo in today's inequalities. Let's also remember the inventors who never became famous. For every James Watt or Richard Arkwright, there were countless tinkerers, craftsmen, and thinkers whose names were lost. Some were poor. Some were women whose work was claimed by male relatives. Some were from marginalized ethnic or religious groups who were denied recognition. And yet, their ideas shaped the world. A minor change to a loom. A new way of laying bricks. A safer way to cool a machine. These details didn't make headlines, but they made a difference. Progress often happens through thousands of small, invisible contributions. Power dynamics, too, are a key part of this story. Industrialists, the factory owners, railroad barons, and bankers, gained enormous influence. They weren't just economic leaders, they shaped laws, education, even the press. Sometimes, they used their power to improve conditions. Often, they didn't. One example is the company town, where a single business owned the factories, the housing, and even the stores. Workers had jobs, but they also lived under the constant control of their employers. Some company towns became models of innovation. Others became symbols of abuse. At the same time, reformers emerged. Journalists wrote exposés. Doctors collected data on disease. Priests and teachers opened schools for the poor. These people believed that industry didn't have to mean injustice. They imagined a different future, one where progress included everyone. So, why don't we hear more of these voices in school? Maybe because their stories don't fit neatly into timelines. Maybe because their struggles are uncomfortable. But maybe, just maybe, they hold the most valuable lessons of all. Because history isn't just about what happened. It's about who it happened to. And when we listen to those who were ignored, we begin to understand the full truth, not just the inventions, but the invisible forces behind them: inequality, bravery, sacrifice, silence, resilience. And when we do that, we start to see our own time more clearly, too. As the machines roared and the smokestacks rose, societies around the world were swept into a new rhythm of life, one that few had seen coming, and even fewer fully understood. The Industrial Revolution didn't just reshape economies. It rewired how people lived, thought, and saw the world, and themselves. Let's take a closer look at how people reacted during this time, both with awe and with fear. For many, the promises of progress felt like salvation. Cities grew rapidly. Railways connected once isolated towns. New jobs brought rural families into urban centers, where the future seemed closer than ever. But along with opportunity came profound confusion. Old ways of life disappeared almost overnight. In villages, the blacksmith or the weaver was once a respected figure, often part of a family trade passed down through generations. Suddenly, machines could do the same work faster and cheaper. Many traditional craftspeople found themselves unemployed, irrelevant. This led to deep emotional shifts. What does it mean when your skill, something you've spent your whole life perfecting, is no longer needed? For some, it was a personal crisis. For others, it sparked resistance. Enter the Luddites, a group of English workers who, between 1811 and 1816, began destroying factory machines. Their goal wasn't mindless destruction. They were protesting the way technology was being used, not against innovation itself, but against the loss of dignity and fairness. Though the term Luddite is often used today to mean someone who hates technology, the original Luddites were making a more nuanced argument: machines without compassion can harm more than they help. Mental health also took a toll. Cities became crowded and chaotic. Imagine moving from a quiet village to a place where chimneys belched smoke 24 hours a day, where the streets never truly went dark, and where you didn't know your neighbors. Social isolation, stress, and exhaustion became widespread. Alcoholism rose in many industrial areas, as did violence and crime. Police forces, as we know them today, began forming partly in response to these rising social tensions. At the same time, new ideologies began to take shape. Thinkers like Karl Marx and Friedrich Engels studied the living conditions of the working class in industrial cities. Their writings, particularly the Communist Manifesto, were born from first-hand observation of inequality and suffering. Whether one agrees with their conclusions or not, their influence on modern politics and economics is undeniable. Industrialization didn't just build machines, it built new ways of thinking about justice, class, and power. Religion, too, was challenged. Some people believed the industrial age was proof of human progress and divine favor. Others saw it as a moral crisis, a time when greed outpaced grace. Churches in industrial cities often struggled to adapt. In response, new religious movements emerged, many focused on social justice, workers' rights, and education for the poor. Art changed as well. The Romantic movement, in painting, poetry, and music, often reacted against industrialization. Artists like William Blake or J.M.W. Turner captured both the wonder and the terror of this new age. Their work reminds us that progress can be both beautiful and brutal. Let's not forget how different parts of the world experienced this transformation. In Japan, The Meiji Restoration, starting in 1868, was a direct response to Western industrial power. Japan rapidly modernized its economy and military, determined not to fall behind. In contrast, the Ottoman Empire and Qing China struggled to industrialize at the same speed, leading to political instability and increased pressure from foreign powers. Each society had to answer the same basic questions. Should we embrace the machine? Can we control it? And what do we risk if we don't? Ordinary people asked simpler questions. Will I lose my job? Can I feed my children? Is this really a better life? Some found hope. Others found only hardship. But all were touched, in some way, by the growing pulse of the modern world. And perhaps the most powerful change was internal, a new sense of time. Before industrialization, time was natural, guided by the sun, the seasons, the needs of crops and animals. But now, time was mechanical. Clocks ruled the factories. Bells signaled shift changes. Even leisure had to fit the factory rhythm. Time itself became something you could sell and lose. This shift in how people understood their lives, as measured by hours, productivity, and wages, is still with us today. It shapes how we work, how we rest, and how we measure success. It wasn't just a new economy. It was a new psychology. And once that shift happened, there was no going back. Looking back, it's clear the Industrial Revolution was not just a technological turning point, it was a mirror, reflecting the deepest parts of human nature. Ambition, ingenuity, fear, greed, hope, and resilience all played their part in shaping what came next. And as we look at our modern world, filled with smartphones, artificial intelligence, and automation, it's impossible not to see echoes of the 18th and 19th centuries in the choices we face today. So, what can we learn? First, let's acknowledge something simple but powerful: change is not neutral. It doesn't automatically make life better or worse. What matters is how we shape that change, who benefits from it, who gets left behind, and whether we have the courage to correct the course when it leads to harm. One of the most lasting legacies of the Industrial Revolution is the debate over fairness. Workers' rights, minimum wages, labor laws, and even weekends off, these were not automatic gifts of progress. They were hard-won battles, often fought by the very people the system was leaving behind. These fights remind us that progress without compassion can become oppression in disguise. Second, we can reflect on the role of education. In the early industrial age, most workers had little to no formal schooling. This made it easy for factory owners to manipulate and exploit labor. Over time, governments and reformers realized that education wasn't just a moral good, it was essential for creating a thoughtful, informed society that could adapt to new technologies. Today, as we face another wave of transformation, from digital disruption to climate change, education remains our best defense against fear and division. The more people understand the forces shaping their lives, the more empowered they are to shape the future with wisdom and empathy. Third, we can consider the planet itself. During the Industrial Revolution, there was little understanding of environmental damage. Factories dumped waste into rivers. Forests were cut down for fuel. Coal smoke blackened the skies. No one imagined that these local problems would one day become global, warming the climate, acidifying the oceans, threatening biodiversity. Now, we do know. And that knowledge gives us responsibility. If industrialization showed us how powerful human innovation can be, the 21st century must show how responsible we can be with that power. But here's a hopeful truth. we've already learned how to change the world. The question now is whether we can do it again, not just for growth, but for balance. Not just for profit, but for purpose. Think about energy. Just as coal powered the first factories, wind and solar could power the next revolution, one that's cleaner, fairer, and more sustainable. But that will only happen if we treat climate policy not as a luxury, but as a human necessity. Or consider technology. The same creativity that built steam engines now builds algorithms. Will we use artificial intelligence to divide or to connect? To replace people or to empower them? The Industrial Revolution teaches us that progress isn't a straight line. It zigs and zags. It lifts some up and pushes others down. But at its heart is always a choice, a chance to decide not just what we build, but why. We must ask, are we building a world that honors dignity? A world that leaves no one behind? A world we'd want our children to inherit? And maybe, most importantly, are we paying attention to the voices we don't hear, just as historians now try to listen to the workers, the women, the colonized, the ones history once ignored? Because history isn't just about the powerful. It's about all of us. And every time we learn from the past, we get better at shaping the future. Let's keep asking hard questions. Let's stay curious. Let's imagine a revolution, not of steam, but of spirit. One that's driven not by machines, but by meaning. That might be the greatest lesson of all. It's never just about what we invent. It's about what we become. Let's take a moment now to explore some of the rich language we encountered in this story. These words and expressions not only help you understand English more deeply, they also give you tools to express your own thoughts with clarity and emotion. Here are some of the key takeaways. 1. To shape the future. Meaning, to influence what the future will be like. Example, education remains our best defense against fear and division. It helps shape the future. 2. Left behind. Meaning, ignored or excluded from progress or opportunity. Example, who benefits from change, and who gets left behind? 3. Hard won. Meaning, achieved through great effort or struggle. Example, these were not automatic gifts of progress. They were hard-won battles. 4. Oppression in disguise. Meaning, something that seems good or neutral on the surface but actually causes harm or unfair control. Example, progress without compassion can become oppression in disguise. 5. Moral good. Meaning, something that is ethically right or beneficial to society. Example, education wasn't just a moral good, it was essential for creating a thoughtful society. 6. To warm the climate. Meaning, to contribute to global warming or climate change. Example, no one imagined these local problems would one day warm the climate. 7. Not just, but. Meaning, a structure used to emphasize a comparison or expansion. Example, not just for profit, but for purpose. Note, this structure adds rhythm and emotional contrast to your speech or writing. 8. To pay attention to. Meaning, to notice or listen to something carefully. Example, are we paying attention to the voices we don't hear? 9. At its heart. Meaning, at the core or center of something, especially an idea or issue. Example, at its heart is always a choice, not just what we build, but why. 10. To stand the test of time. Meaning, to remain useful, respected, or true even after many years. Example, some inventions, like public education or clean energy, stand the test of time. 11. A revolution of spirit. Meaning, a major positive change in how we think, feel, or treat others, not just technology. Example, let's imagine a revolution, not of steam, but of spirit. 12. Echoes of the past. Meaning, events or patterns from the past that repeat or influence the present. Example, it's impossible not to see echoes of the industrial age in our modern world. The Industrial Revolution was more than machines and markets. It was a shift in how we lived, how we thought, and how we imagined the future. It gave us speed, power, and possibility. But it also gave us new questions, questions we are still trying to answer today. Do we build for progress or for people? Does every new invention bring us closer to freedom, or further from what makes us human? We've seen that history isn't just a list of events. It's a story we're still writing, with our choices, our values, and our voices. Maybe that's the most important lesson: the future doesn't arrive fully formed. We shape it, one decision at a time. Next time, we'll look at a very different kind of revolution, one where people didn't rise for machines or factories, but for their right to be free, the civil rights movement. What drove ordinary people to stand up against injustice, and how did their courage echo across the world? If today's story gave you something to think about, or if it made you see our modern world a little differently, please like this video, share it with someone who loves learning, and leave a comment below. What part of today's journey stayed with you? This channel is built around you, learners who are curious, thoughtful, and ready to grow. Thank you for being here. And remember, learning English isn't just about grammar or vocabulary. It's about understanding the world and your place in it. See you in the next story.